just going to have a conversation, but that conversation will be guided by your questions. So please make this very informal. It's okay to courteously interrupt one of your panel members if necessary, and be sure to make a point that you think that's credible. Is that okay, panel, for a start? So I will kind of set this up because we have a really big question: global challenges and global opportunities. I think we could talk about just about anything in that, but we obviously want to focus on competitiveness as we go through it. Let me share with you just two things that I would hope other panel members would share their perspectives on at times. There's a slogan that perhaps you've heard: think global, act local. It's been around for decades. It was really referring to grassroots efforts or trying to improve things. Are they thinking about the global implications? Now, in this day where we're all concerned with global warming, climate change, it's a great example. I could be doing things locally that could impact the global environment because CO2 doesn't know where to stop going. So that's an important message. And in fact, a couple decades ago, I had taken that theme and gone through about 7 countries in Asia, making a presentation on that theme. And I returned back to Japan, where I was living at the time, and I talked to my company's president of Japan. And I said, I didn't see you before I left, and let me tell you about this wonderful thing, think global, act local, I've been talking about. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. That's excellent. Everything I did was excellent, it turned out. But he said, it's a pity you got it wrong. And I said, oh, you just sink through the floor when you do that. And he says, it's think local, resource global. And if you're thinking about the customers, you're thinking about the people locally, where you resource the knowledge, the materials can be global. And so I think that's a different twist on how to think about the subject that I hope maybe our panel members could reflect on, your view of how you do this magic between doing what's right locally and then doing what's right globally to leverage what's happening. So open conversation, but maybe we'll have the first comments. Just go down the line. Deborah?
Well, Chad, I think one of the really important imperatives for our innovation future is to really identify, which we've done in the U.S. and many countries have done. We did really pioneering work on this to understand, what are the assets and capabilities in particular regions, not just states, but the region, and how we accelerate, again, the theme of this meeting, the development of the new business and processes, but very importantly, the skilled workforce. And there are many examples where we've seen, I'll give San Diego as an example, a city, a region in the United States that started out as basically a holiday, wonderful place to go. I'm sure some of you have been there, and a Navy base. It's still one of the largest U.S. naval bases in the world. But because of the pivotal role of the university there and enlightened local leaders and business leaders, they invested in the industries that are now global. Qualcomm, the biotech industry, all started really as ideas and fragile startups. Linkabit, I always love the example. Qualcomm started with a small firm called Linkabit that was in the early stage of trying to provide some analog communication between ships for the U.S. Navy. And now, of course, it's a global enterprise. So I think the model, and this is, again, we can look at Argentina, Brazil, many countries, Japan, thinking of how you can optimize what are the talents and assets in a region, but then build them with this global connectivity is very important. Because at the end of the day, we all live and work in physical places, even though we're global citizens.
Excellent.
So along the lines of what you just articulated, I actually think the think globally, act locally is completely wrong.
Okay.
And the environment is a really great example. So I call the 21st century the fairness century. We're in the middle of the biggest improvement in human living conditions in the history of the species. It's extraordinary what's happening in terms of people entering the global middle class. The billions of people who are moving out of subsistence living, who are now getting protein in their diet, who have basic conditions of sanitation, better shelter, the ability to move around, the ability to aspire and imagine what. I mean, it's just an extraordinary time that we're living in terms of the improvement in human condition. But what's the big challenge? The big challenge is, as so many countries in the world are industrializing, will we destroy the planet in the process? And we need an industrialization path, or a path to allow for the elevation of billions of people to a great life that isn't environmentally destructive. We will not get there, in my opinion, if the developed countries just think and act, well, or just act locally. It's not just about reducing the environmental footprint of countries like Canada. We in Canada need to be thinking about what are the deployable low-cost technologies that we can actually share with the world that will help them industrialize in a different way than we did. So I think the fundamentally is actually about acting globally to support this extraordinary change. I'll just give one other example. We're talking about opportunities today. I mean, food is obviously a huge opportunity, but life sciences and health is a huge innovation opportunity. The question is, will we develop the social mechanics to allow the extraordinary possibilities of improved healthcare to actually reach the people of the world, right, at prices that they can afford? Right, that is the fundamental question. Right, so I would say it's about acting globally.
Great.
Well, coming from a small country like Greece, I think most probably we are the example of global pool of knowledge, trying to see what can we get out of this to apply it locally. We have no choice because, first of all, it is on the global arena where all the quest for ideas is happening, and all the innovation is happening. Greece, like other small countries, is a small place, so we have no choice but to leverage that pool. The trick is, how do you select out of that pool things which can be profitably and effectively applied locally, taking into account the local conditions? And I can tell you, my presence here today is really an effort to that. Greece has challenges as a country, and we can do a lot with the pool of knowledge that GFCC is bringing together. And even yesterday in our discussion, there was a lot of flurry of ideas which we can bring back to the country and we can try to apply in our efforts to really move forward the needle for the whole economy. Because the whole quest is all about how you compete internationally, and in order to do so, you have to be innovative. And since not every innovation can take place in Greece, we need to borrow from the global pool.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And you said something actually I just heard now, and I haven't even thought about it, but I thought maybe I'll bring an example source globally. In Saudi Arabia, we have been going through a huge transformation, our Vision 2030, and we've talked about it for the past 2 years. We've started the Vision 2016. And the whole point of addressing the vision for the first time actually in Saudi Arabia is to stay away from oil and gas and diversify our economy. And we have a lot of natural resources other than the oil and gas. We have the sun and the sand and the sea and other investments that we want to attract to the country. We have a lot of our opportunities for investors to invest in Saudi Arabia, but what we actually lacked is the environment, the business environment. And that's what we wanted to source globally, the knowledge of how we can actually ease off the business environment and become a more competitive nation, a nation that is open to the world for the first time, open in tourism. Who would think that Saudi Arabia would open to tourism? For investments in technology and innovation, we want to create the smartest city in the world called NEOM. All of this needed us to look back at our business environment and ask ourselves, are we ready to invite the world to come and invest in Saudi Arabia? what is lacking in Saudi Arabia and how can we fix it. So we've partnered with a lot of international organizations to do that, like the World Bank. We've learned a lot from them. But I think we became very obsessed about ranking and how we ranked among the world in Saudi Arabia. But we are staying away from this. But what we've learned from the World Bank is actually set a target for ourselves for competitiveness or ease of doing business, and try to reach that target following international standards and practices. And we've achieved a lot since we've started. This year alone, we have actually reformed. We have sent 51 reforms, and that touches on the laws and the regulations and the policies, but also fixing the government agencies, entities. And the model that we've created is a very unique model that actually the World Bank is using as a case study right now to announce to the world. And how we do it is we put all the government agencies on one table every week. We develop a program that will meet our needs and that will develop that human being not only to become a member in the vision, to realize the vision, but also a global human being that can work anywhere in the world.
On this education issue, so if you think about creativity fundamentally, creativity flourishes in two contradictory conditions. The first condition is challenge. You need to be challenged. But the second is security. People are most creative when they feel safe and they're challenged. And I just want to come back to the education issue. In countries like Canada, but not just Canada, many countries, that fundamental condition of security is absent. So the old regime where you could do well in school and get a degree and you were set, the one thing you didn't have to worry about was you have an income, is gone. And the confidence in educational credentials is evaporating. And part of that is because the credentials are sitting on the wrong, they're not actually delivering the right skills, the skills people actually need, right? Teamwork, project management, analytic skills, the ability to sell, to observe where you can add value and articulate value creation. I mean, all of those skill sets aren't actually residing in our education system. So that anxiety about the future is based on, it's real. There's a real reason to be anxious. The reason I raise this is because I cannot think of anything more fundamentally important for what we want to achieve. I love Deborah's vision of what we can actually do as a race, as human beings in the coming decades. Nothing is more fundamental than innovation in our education system. And I'm actually optimistic that some of the crisis that we're experiencing as educational, and I don't just mean universities, it goes right into the primary system, but some of the anxiety that we're getting from the educational sector about their future is needed right now, because we actually have fundamentally to ask ourselves this question. What are the skill sets that we can be giving to our young people that can give them a justified confidence in their future in the digital era? And so that's I really like where you're going. I think we all have to grapple with the human dimension of this.
Skills. Everybody wants to get into university and graduate from university, but then we end up with a lot of surplus. We don't know. That's why we have a huge unemployment problem, because we are teaching them for the wrong jobs. Plus, we're always teaching them for a job, but do we also want to teach them how to create the jobs? And that's something that we haven't been doing in the past. And let's not focus on always university or going into higher education, but what about secondary schooling? Why aren't we building academies into the secondary schools? And that's what we're doing in our education reforms. Let's skill the students right at the very beginning, even from the 7th grade. When they graduate from their 12th grade, they will have a credential, an academic credential that will take them to either vocational or university, but also they can work immediately after high school for a few years until they decide where they want to be and what we want them to be as well. So we can guide them, but they also can create their own jobs. And that's something that we have been missing in our education system for many, many years.
I would just jump in on this issue of education, and obviously for young people in the next generation. I think in some ways we have to face this radical revolution in education and credentialing, but also it's a back to the future story too, because in my view and experience, and the kind of work that many of us do in this room, that we do, people such as myself that engage in the policy arena, have been in and out of government, conceptual thinking, connecting the dots, seeing what's not seen, does not come in one's development without a grounding in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. And we are doing young people a tremendous disservice by taking out of the elementary curriculum the history of our nations. I mean, in the United States alone, some of these assessments, young people don't even know, basic history about the country. And I'll give you an example. I mean, many in this room know, and Roberto, I have a very deep collaboration, personal affinity with Brazil, neighbors to Argentina. And I was devastated to read, less than, 2 months ago about this terrible fire at the National History Museum of Brazil. But what was almost worse about the tragedy, that was 95% of the people in Brazil didn't even know it existed, their whole history. So we have to, as our generation, ensure that our young people are really going to have their history, the value of literature. I mean, think of what we learn through literature. We often joke and say, if you only had one, this is maybe an English comment, but if you only had one set of books, read Shakespeare, all the lessons of life. But so that's one point I want to make. But the other is, we all know that the younger generation are absolutely, totally proficient in advanced electronics. And so there's this dichotomy between parents that you see letting their children, at a year old, play with an iPhone, discover everything, getting on iPads. And then this school in Silicon Valley, where the high-tech gazillionaires, as they were, send their children, no electronics are allowed until they're 7th or 8th grade. None. Now, what's going on in the mind, and how, are people being developed for this creativity and innovation? But one practical suggestion is, and this could be a global crowdsourcing activity. It would maybe, I'm not proposing it for the GFCC chat, but we could think of a vehicle, just like a global Peace Corps, to develop a cadre of cybersecurity patriots, because every country in the world is facing relentless problems with cybersecurity, both malicious attacks, but also just the resiliency of their systems, and everything is digitized. And young people, this would be an area in which they could both use their skills, advance their skills, do creative things out of the box, and develop some solutions at scale. And I think the cybersecurity infrastructure of the world is very, very fragile now.
Deborah, and I understand you're planting a tree with that idea.
I'm planting a tree.
So we have a number of questions from the audience. All the panel members have an individual question. So please note and respond. But there is one question for the whole panel. How can the developed world really understand the developing world needs?
Listen. No, I mean it's fairly straightforward. We actually have to engage, right? There's a reason why I'm a deputy minister in Canada. There's a reason why I'm here, and it's not to talk.
Other thoughts?
I think they have no choice, because they have to trade with them. So in order to be able to trade, you have to understand them, to understand their needs, in order to be able to sell them products. That has been our history over the past at least 200 years, if not long. So I think it's happening, whether we like it or not. It may not be to perfection. It may not be meeting all a variety of objectives, but the fact that we are globalized is evidence to that. So, is your question whether we can go deeper? We can always do better. Mm-hmm. But I think in the world which has become increasingly globalized, we have no choice but to enter into a dialogue to understand each other better, so we can work harmoniously together. We can really prosper both. So I think that's one-way street in my view. Now, how can we do it better? Through a variety of ways, which, again, human ingenuity basically discovers along the way. I don't think there are formulas. It's just dialogue and pursuing your own interest. And in doing so, you open new avenues every day.
I would just add that if I could think of one global need, and both an opportunity and a challenge and a moral imperative, is that our planet, you can comment about the agriculture practices and whether they're sustainable, we can feed the planet. And the fact that there are so many people living without basic food, nutrition every day throughout the world is, I think, the worst scandal, and not having, clean, portable water. We heard a wonderful example of leadership yesterday from the city of Quito of how they're taking massive amounts of wasted food every day and creating the ecosystem to ensure that that gets to hungry people. And I think the United Nations and some of the global organizations that have this responsibility are not stepping up to the plate because, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I've heard that on the supply chain, all the waste is not from the production, but getting food to people who need it.
Learning from meetings as such, to be honest, we have learned a lot from international organizations. We've learned a lot from best practices, not only us as a country, but I think the whole world is learning from each other. Attending such meetings, networking, always inviting best practice in, setting up some targets for ourselves to be at the top. I think that helped at least us a lot in learning from the rest of the world globally.
I just want to add this. It's so basic. We must empathize with one another. One of the challenges in this environment is we're talking about competition. And all of us spend a certain part of our day, I do, trying to figure out how to win. But at heart, we this is a point for humanity where we must understand our shared humanity, where we must empathize with one another. We have so many contexts which invite us to do the opposite, right? Which invite us to try to beat one another. We have to actually get grounded in our shared humanity.
And George, I'll speak up on this one. With the refugee crisis in Greece, through its worst financial crisis, unemployment, what's the unemployment level been?
Well, in the peak of the crisis, it went as high as 30%, 29%. 30%. And now it is just below 20%, 19%.
And yet, the Greeks alone on islands as individuals have been the best of any country in dealing with the refugee crisis. And that's an example of what you're saying, Dylan. And I think that's something your country should be very proud of.
So we're a bit over time, but I want to ask one question for the panel for Argentina. And I'll give my answer first to give you a bit of time to think. So what's your one piece of advice from all your experience in various countries and different walks of life from our experience here in Argentina? My answer to that is that this currency shift can also be seen as a blessing. It's a chance to inspect things and think differently about things. The only way you can lose is by standing still. If you let it make you freeze and don't go forward, that is not good. But if you go forward as a people, as a country, you will come out much stronger and with a very bright future, and I'm confident you will.
Chad, building on your comment, I would say stay with the program of the reform of the fiscal system that relates to this. Also, really connecting the dots to have a regulatory environment that is innovation friendly, not hostile. And two, to continue looking out into the world and engaging with the world from the get-go. I mean, there's some very significant gazelle companies here in Argentina that have now, moved into the global arena, and with the talent and creativity of this nation, I think all the assets are there. It's connecting the dots, but really allow these reform measures to go forward.
We have this. I'm going to maybe say something odd, but we are at a time when there's a richer dialogue about what economic development means. My view is you can't focus on economic growth to the exclusion of issues of equity and inclusiveness, because what inclusive growth gives you is it gives you the opportunity to unlock all of the potential in your country. So if most of your citizens actually benefit from growth, then most of your citizens are actually working on improving the situation in your economy. Now, we have challenges around income inequality in Canada as well. I'm not suggesting that Argentina is bad, but I think that it's important. It will be important for Argentina to unlock the individual potential, not just the potential of the system. Yeah,
Great.
Actually, my message, I am not an Argentinian expert, so it would be really ill-advised to really offer something on something which you don't know, but a couple of observations. This country, some time ago, used to be one of the top 5 richest countries in the world. And when you look at the map, at the enormity of the country, the natural resources it has, one wonders and speculates and can really postulate that this country has the resources to play on the global arena. So the question is, how do you, as Colin said, unlock this potential and make it happen? And a couple of suggestions is, if you did it before well, why don't you try to see what you did before and do it again? It's obvious. And I would say, to me, it is really all about maximizing your talent so you can maximize your revenues. But it seems here also there's something wrong with the revenues and cost equation, because the country is going bust. It seems that it's accumulating debt again. So either it's not doing a very good job on the revenues, which means it's not utilizing its resources effectively, which basically said, let excellence play out so you can really make the most out of these resources, and take a hold of your costs, meaning you must be spending a little bit more than you should. All right? I think it's basic arithmetic here.
If you pardon me, it sounds like a banker's answer.
Well, it's ultimately, it boils down to numbers,
But
okay?
it comes down to numbers.
It boils down to numbers, what you make and what you spend. And if you do not make enough, you have to spend less.
Last word.
I would say that I would advise personally that they push the envelope a little bit. I mean, take the risk. Saudi Arabia took the risk of staying away from oil and gas and getting into something that we don't understand very well, but we've learned it and we're learning, and we're actually developing in this area. Let me just give you a little example. G20 was here, and one of our officials actually told me that he was talking to some of the ministers in Argentina, and they were talking about what Saudi Arabia needs and what Argentina has. And just by having that conversation, it's basic, it's really basic, but there turned out to be that a lot of things that Argentina can offer to Saudi Arabia that we didn't know. And it's because of the thought that, well, it's too far. Well, that's not a reason why we shouldn't be doing such a business and investment. So these opportunities, think globally, move out of the region, and just think what the rest of the world needs that you have and they don't have, and just source them.
Great. Could you join me in thanking our panel?